This is chapter 59 of Life of Pi. Alone or not, lost or not, I was thirsty, I was hungry. I pulled the rope. There was a slight tension. As soon as I lessened my grip on it and I slid out, and the distance between the lifeboat and the raft increased. So the lifeboat drifted faster than the raft. Pulling it along, I noticed the fact without thinking or anything of it. My mind was more focused on doing of Richard Parker's. By the looks of it, he was under the tarp. I pulled the rope till I was right next to the bow. I reached to the gunwale as I crouched, preparing for myself for a quick, rapid on the locker. A series of waves got me thinking. I noticed with the raft next to it, the lifeboat had changed directions. It was no longer perpetual. The waves in the broadside to them was begging for a roll from side to side and rolling from the unsettled and stomach, which the reason for the change became clear to me. The raft, when let out, was acting as the sea anchor, as the drag that pulled on the lifeboat turned to the bow and faced the waves. You see, waves and steady winds are usually perpendicular to each other, so if the boat is pushed by the wind and is held back to the sea anchor, it will turn until it offers at the last resistance to the wind, that is, until that the line that is the right angles the waves, which makes for a front to back pitching that is much more comfortable side to side rolling. With the raft next to the boat, the dragging effect was gone. There was nothing to steer. The boat head into the wind, therefore it turned broadside and rolled. What may seem like a detail to you was something which would have saved my life, which Richard Parker would have come to regret. As if to confirm my fresh insight, I heard a growl in the disconsolate growl, something indefinably green and queasy in its tone. He was maybe a good swimmer, but he was not much of a sailor. I had a chance yet. At least I got cocky, my abilities to manipulate him. I received the moment of quiet and snitter warning about him that I was against. It seemed Richard Parker, with the magnetic pull of life, so charismatic in his vitality, and the other expressions of life is intolerable. I was on the point of raising myself over the bow when I heard a gentle thrashing buzz. I saw something small land in the water next to me. It was a cockroach. It floated for a second or two before being swallowed by an underwater mouth. Another was a cockroach landed in the water in the same next minute. 10 or so cockroaches popped out of the water on either side of the bow. Each was claimed by a fish. The last of the foreign life forms of an abandoning ship. I carefully brought my eyes to the gunwale. The first thing I saw was a lying fold of the tarp above the bow bench. The large cockroach perhaps patronized the clan. I watched strangely interested. When it decided it was time, it deployed its wings, rose in the air, and the minute clattering hovered above the lifeboat momentarily, as if making sure no one had been left behind, then veered overboard to its death. Now were 2 in 5 days populations of orangutans, zebras, hyenas, rats, flies, cockroaches, and been wiped out, except for the bacteria of worms that might still be alive, or the remains of animals. There was no other life left on board besides me and Richard Parker. Yeah. It was not a comforting thought. I lifted myself and breathlessly opened the locker lid. I deliberately did not look under the tarp, for fear that looking would be like shouting and attract Parker attention. Only once, with the lid was leaning against the tarp, did I dare to let sense consider it was beyond it. A smell came into my nose, a musky smell of urine, quite sharp what a cat cage in a zoo smells of. Tigers are highly territorial, and it was with their urine that the mark of boundaries of its territory. Here were good news wearing a foul dress. The odor was coming exclusively from below the tarp. Richard Parker territorial claims seemed to be limited on the floor of the boat. This held promise. If I could make a tarp mine, we might get along. I held my breath, lowered my head, and cocked it to the side to see beyond of the edge of the lid. There rainwater and 4 inches of it sloshing above the floor of the lifeboat. Richard Parker's own freshwater pond. He was doing exactly what I would be doing in his place, cooling off in the shade. The day was getting beastly hot. He was flat on the floor of the boat, facing away from me, his hind legs sticking straight back and splayed out, the back paws facing the stomach, inner thighs lying directly against the floor. The position looked silly, but was not doubt very pleasant. I returned the business of survival. I opened the carton of emergency rations and ate my fill. About the third of the package. It was remarkable how little it took to make my stomach feel full. It was about to drink from the rain catcher pouch slung across my shoulder when my eyes fell upon the graduated drinking bakers. If I could not go for a dip, could I at least have a sip? My own supplies of water would not last forever. It took hold of the beakers, leaned over, lowered the lid just as much as I needed to, and tremulously dipped the beaker into Parker's pond. 4 feet from his back paws, his upturned pads with their wet fur looked like little desert islands surrounded by seaweed. I brought it back to 500 milliliters. It was a little discolored. Specks were floating in it. Did I worry about interesting some horrid bacteria? I didn't even think about it. All I had on my mind was thirst. I drained the beaker of the dregs in great satisfaction. Nature is preoccupied with blame. So it did not surprise me that nearly right away I felt that the urge of urinate. I relieved myself in the beaker. I produced so exactly the amount I had just downed, and it was as if a minute hadn't passed and I was still considering Richard Parker's rainwater. I hesitated. I felt the urge to tilt the beaker into my mouth once more. I resisted the temptation, but it was so hard. Mockery be damned. My urine looked delicious. It was suffering yet dehydrating. So liquid was a pale in color. It glowed in the sunlight, looking like a glass of apple juice. It was guaranteed fresh, which certainly couldn't be said that a canned water that was my staple. But I heeded my better judgment. I splashed the urine on the tarp and over the locker lid, and to stake my claim. I stole another 2 beakers of water from Richard Parker without urinating this time. I felt freshly watered and potted plant. Now it was time to improve my situation. I turned the contents of the locker and the main promises they held. I brought out a second rope and tethered the raft of the lifeboat with it. I discovered what a solar this is, a solar still device to produce fresh water from salt water. It consists of an inflatable transparent cone set up upon a round life buoy, like a buoyancy chamber that has the surface of a black rubbery canvas stretched across the century. The still operations of the principle of distillation, seawater lying beneath sealed cone on the black canvas is heated by the sun and evaporates, gathering inside of the surface one cone. The salt-free water trickles down and collects gully and the perimeter of the cone carefully. The survival manual told me I inflated over 12 cones with the air I filled in each buoyancy chamber and lifeboat raft, which meant that not only I could not lose, that still should be knots become loose, and also I have the effect of the secondary emergency rope, which keeps me tethered in the lifeboat. That still looks pretty much symmetrical as they were floated on the water, but they looked flimsy and doubtful of the capacity to produce fresh water. I directed my attention to improving the raft. I exclaimed, every knot that held it together, making sure each was tight and secure. After some thought, I decided to transform fifth oar into the forced oar into the small mass of shorts. I ended the oar, and I swerted the edge and hunting knife and painstakingly cut a knot into it. About halfway down, the knife pointed and drilled 3 holes with the flat part. Work as slow but satisfied. They kept mine busy. They were about to finish. I lashed the oar vertically positioned inside of one, and the corners of the raft, flat part and mast head rising in the air, handle disappearing underwater.